Just war is a very interesting concept because it sounds like almost self-defeating. War, how can war be just? However, it's a well-known expression that has a long history in all civilizations, including the Western civilization. Now, I have found this little drawing of a dove because it expresses the apparent self-contradiction in the term of just war. The dove tries to bring peace with an olive branch, but at the same time, it has missiles like a fighter jet because it's the expression of wanting to create peaceful circumstances by means that are not peaceful. We have already seen that earlier. So the question is really, is there such a is it possible? Is there such a thing as a war that is just? And if so, what are the conditions for a war to be considered just? And well, I put the subtitle addressing ambiguities because it's ambiguous, ambivalent. It's not clear cut. You can immediately see that it's a concept that can easily be abused and that will not be easy to defend. And yet, there are certain circumstances where most of us would think you have to do something. So, any definition of just war, and there are many definitions, will need to consider one thing. What are the conditions under which a war can be undertaken and it's considered just? In most cases, war is considered a bad thing, not desirable. All, all religions pretty much consider war to be a bad thing because all religions speak about love, compassion, benevolence, and so on. Uh, a religion like Islam, for instance, is very well known these days for the notion of holy war, jihad. But in Islam itself, there are very clear and very restrictive conditions for jihads to be able to really be what it pretends to be, jihad, or uh, a holy war. Very specific and very limited circumstances. In many jihads that are started by political leaders in Islamic countries are rejected by spiritual leaders in Islam who consider this to be an abuse of the notion of jihad. The only jihad that's always there and always correct, always desirable, is what Islam calls the greater jihad, which is the war inside of myself, my war against sin. That war is always good. It's of course not a violent war. It's my effort to overcome my sinful nature. You have that in all religions, one way or another. So, from the perspective of religions, again, a war is not desirable. And from the perspective of non-religious people, it is also not desirable for the same simple reason that it's destructive. It kills people. It does the opposite of what everybody wants. Now, the most famous name that is usually associated with the notion of just war is Saint Augustine. Again, that's in the Western tradition. And Augustine actually had a very different view of what we consider to be a just war, if we accept this idea. His vision of just war was the so-called divine command theory, or associated to that. A war is just when it is undertaken because God commands it. God says we should do war. For instance, in the Old Testament, you have many circumstances where many situations where God asks Israel to start a war. Then the question is not, is that just or not? It is automatically just because God said you should do it. So it justifies war in the name of God and not because God thinks it's a just war. God, God doesn't need to have any reason to declare that the war is a just war. Just because he is God, he can decide anything he wants, and the war will be just. That was actually Augustine's perspective, which today is very much generally rejected, even by Christians, by just about anybody. And what we today consider to be the most valid reason to start a war or to start fighting, to use violence, which is the right to self-defense. After all, somebody attacks me, I'm not going to let him kill me. So I'll fight, but that's not even in legally, if you kill somebody who is trying to kill you, you are not considered a murderer. It's self-defense. But that's what we consider today. But St. Augustine didn't see it that way. What is the evil of war? Is it the death of some who will soon die in any case? So he didn't have a very high opinion of the value of human life. He said, yeah, we are going to die anyway. So I'm 77, somebody kills me today, maybe I could live another 10 years or 20 or whatever. I'm going to die anyway. So if he kills me today, it's no big deal. I should accept it. The real evils in war are love of violence, revengeful cruelty, enmity, lust of power. So all these reasons that people have when they go to war that are not good. You want to take something from somebody, you want to kill him. So that, he says, that's the real evil of war. And all these reasons are not valid, and including the reason to defend myself against an enemy. The only reason is God commands you to do it. That's the holy war. So anyway, it's interesting because Augustine is the most famous proponent of holy war, of just war, but his views were very different from what you have today. Now, here I have the New World Encyclopedia, which was created by, started by two parents, and there's a rather explicit and not really lengthy, but somewhat a detailed definition of holy war is. And I will not read the first page in detail. He said any war that has to be considered holy or just war, and perhaps holy, needs to have something that justify it. So there should be some justification for violence depending on the circumstances, the situation, etc. And then there need to be some kind of ways that it is make it acceptable to be waged. Not only you need to have a good reason to wage a war, but you cannot do it in just any which way. There need to be specific criteria. And I will read this second page. The concept of just war has not been universally accepted. That's a given. There are people who say that no matter what, you should never fight. Don't fight back. And in the New Testament, you have, the other cheek. If somebody slaps you on the cheek, just offer the other cheek. That's absolute pacifism and non-violence. And the application of criteria defining what is a just war is also very difficult, not easy, and especially its application. It's easy to give a beautiful general principle, but when you go into detail and you apply it in a practical situation, it becomes very difficult. There have been numerous occasions in history, however, when wars were fought for just causes and with which advanced human society in a beneficial direction. So here, the New World Encyclopedia takes a position to say that, yeah, actually there are, even though it's difficult to define and not everybody agrees, there are situations where a war is just and allowed things to move into a better direction. That was good for everybody and, of course, also for God. We'll get back to that, of course. Ultimately, though, humankind must move beyond the age of resolving differences through acts of violence and establish a world in which war no longer exists. So that's the perspective of the kingdom of God on earth, Chanilguk, the kingdom of peace. And so it means war can be tolerated and can be sometimes necessary to improve a situation, but it's a very regrettable situation where you have to do that, go to war. Eventually, we have to move beyond the situation where even a just war is needed and get into a situation where all humankind can resolve everything peacefully without going to war. So just war may be acceptable, but only temporarily and only as a, you know, better alternative than nothing, but not really desirable. Now, the just war maybe reminds you of another term called war crimes. So they seem to be antithetical. That means one excludes the other. You know, if your war is just, then there's no war crimes. If you commit war crimes, the war is not just. And I brought that in because it also shows the different way in which both are accepted. So just war is actually a philosophical and moral concept. It's not a political or a legal concept. The United Nations has never defined what just war is. And there's no treaty about it. Just war is really a moral and philosophical concept that can be applied to various wars. You can say, well, World War II was a just war. You can say it wasn't, but it's not a legal concept. On the other hand, war crimes are very precisely defined by the international community. And war crimes are a certain type of behavior in war that is a crime, even if you're a soldier who is just following the rules. You're a soldier, you go to war because you have been conscripted, you know, you don't want to go, but they force you to go. So that is considered an innocent behavior, even if you kill people, but you are a soldier, you have a uniform, and you are not considered a murderer. But if you go to rape a woman in the process of taking a city, then that's a war crime. So these crimes are very clearly defined. And even if you're on the good side, you can commit war crimes. And even if you're on the bad side, the side of the aggressor country, as long as you just do your job and you don't commit atrocious acts, you are not a war criminal because you are forced to do it. So it's complex, but essentially that is the difference. However, even though war crimes are addressed by the United Nations and other international institutions, and just war is not. Indirectly, just war is a little bit defined by the United Nations. It never says that kind of war is just, but it just creates very specific, identifies very specific situations where war can be accepted as specifically self-defense war. So it doesn't say it's a just war, but it says that under those circumstances, a country cannot be blamed for defending itself. Now, just war, even though again it's not political or anything, it's just a moral or philosophical concept, there are three generally accepted elements to it, or stages. It's Latin. Jus ad bellum is the conditions that make it acceptable to start a war. Bellum, bellus is in Latin is war. So jus is law or right. So the right to go to war. Then jus in bello, that's the acceptable behavior when you are in a war already. And that's what will lead you to be considered a war criminal or an innocent soldier. And then rarely discussed, but very important to use post bellum, which means right or law after war. That means after war, what should happen? When you defeat a country, can you then kill all the people or destroy or take away all its wealth. Is that acceptable? Or like what happened after World War II, where the United States helped rebuild Germany and Japan out of generosity and certainly also out of self-interest. So it's a mixture, but these are different types of behavior after war, and they're also very significant. Now, the generally accepted criteria for just war, they change a little bit, but they are most generally the same. And I've taken here the most common criteria. First of all, war should be last resort. If you have another choice, you can negotiate, but let's fight it out right away. That's not a just war. There should be a just cause. I cannot fight a war because I want to take your land or because I hate you or because I want to have revenge or whatever. I can only do it if there's a just cause. That means for the sake of a higher good, which of course raises the question, who decides what is a just cause? But generally speaking, since it's a philosophical and moral and religious concept, those who talk about it, they define, what is a just cause. In practice, obviously, again, it's not a political or legal term. Then it should be proportional. If you hit me in the face, I cannot cut off your head. That's not a justification for doing that. Many times in wars you have, like World War I started with the assassination of the Crown Prince of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. One person murdered, and then how many millions of people killed. So you could say that was not proportionate. Then probability of success, that's a very important one. And you will see that in R2P, the responsibility to protect in the second half of this week's presentation, that will be considered many times as an important criterion. If you have a situation where it would be perfectly right or even desirable to fight against a certain enemy, because let's say the enemy is destroying a totally innocent population, or in everyday life, you see a bad guy who is attacking and trying to mistreat or kill or whatever an innocent child, then it's just for you to intervene. But there should be probability of success. If you start a just war, no matter how good your reasons are, but it's almost sure that you will not succeed, then you shouldn't do it, because it may be just, but it's not going to have the good result you want, and it's going to cause more people to die for nothing, since you are going to lose anyway. Fifth, legitimate authority. It cannot be just decided by somebody. Okay, I'll go to war. There should be a legitimate, and that's again, who is the legitimate authority? Today, it will be the United Nations for those who accept it. Some kind of an authority that is higher than the two who fight, something like that. But you can see all the problems that this raises. And what about civil wars? If you have a horrible government and people, you have liberation fighters like we saw it last week, who try to get rid of this horrible government. Who is the legitimate authority? Well, the evil government, because they are the ones who are in power. Until they lose it, then it's the new one. So it's tricky. Then the right intent, the right intention. In other words, you cannot go to war out of evil motivation. That's related to just cause. It should not just be to have a good result, but what's in your mind. If you start something, no matter how well you can justify it, if you start a fight because the true reason is you hate the guy or you're jealous, then it's not considered a just war. It's not acceptable. And then comparative justice. You should have an expectation that through that war, you will create a better, a more just situation than before. In other words, you are on the side of goodness, and the enemy is on the side of evil, which again is a big question, of course. So you see that all these criteria, some of them seem very simple, but they're all tricky, and they're all obviously necessary, because if you don't have one of those, then clearly there's no way you can say it's a just war. Here you have the glossary of the University for Peace. It's posted at the bottom under resources in your course. And I will not go through it. It's essentially the same as I have seen here. Here you have 7, here you have 5, but actually they put 2 together. So it's essentially the same, just to show you that there's more than just one way of looking at it. Now here there's a quote that I like very much that shows the entire problem of the definition of what is a just war. And this is by Kenneth Kaunda, who was the first president of Zambia and later became associated with us. He passed away years ago. I've seen him in Korea in one of our conferences. At the end of the conference, I was eating in a restaurant with my wife, and then just 2 tables further down, he was eating with the former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. And he has been very supportive of what we were doing. And here he says, one problem is that it is easy to say amen to each of the conditions, like the criteria that we have seen, the war, to be just, the war needs to be this, and that, and not to be the other thing. But it's easy to say amen to all that, while in practice, reducing these conditions to just one. A just war is one fought by my side, and an unjust war is one fought by your side, which is, I think, it sounds, it's a strong formulation, but I think it's pretty, unfortunately, very often pretty true, pretty much true. Now, in addition to all those who who accept the notion of just war, including among peace scholars or peace activists, I mentioned Gandhi. Gandhi is the quintessential peace activist, I guess, for everybody, uh, at least for most people, but he was not totally against violence. He fasted until almost he died several times because his people were starting violence. But he also said that if you're violent, if your non-violence is cowardly, you're scared to fight, that's worse than violence. And you let innocent people be killed in front of you because they're afraid to defend them. And he considered that in extreme cases, even the use of violence was acceptable, even Gandhi. And so among the people who work for peace, fight for peace, there are many who actually consider the possibility of just war, whether they use the term or not. In certain circumstances, it's desirable. I mean, you have no choice. You don't like to do it, but you have no choice but to fight. But there are the pacifists, what you call absolute pacifism, that says no matter what, if you fight, that's wrong, which means you have to, of course, be totally passive. Uh, Conscientious objectors, for instance, you're in a war, even if your war is what most people would consider a just war, a defensive war. So they don't go to the military, or even when there's no war, they don't want to go to the military because they consider that anything, including being killed, is better than violence, than fighting. You don't want to have anything to do with that. Certain Christians, like the medieval Bohemian Christians, that's just one group of Christians in the late Middle Ages, uh, were like that. So there are absolute pacifists among the Christians. Quakers are very much like that, and others, Jehovah's Witnesses, for instance, as well. And a great man like Leon Tolstoy, who is essentially a writer, was also an absolute pacifist, but not, as I said before, not Gandhi, for instance. Um, why did I mention Constantine? Because Constantine is the man brought, who made Christianity to be, caused it to be accepted in the Roman Empire in 313. We know that from the divine principle. So he's a great man. He allowed Christianity to become an accepted religion, and then soon after that, it became the state religion in the Roman Empire. But some, including some unificationists, think that the way Christianity became accepted was not necessarily the best way, because Constantine was actually, he was waging a war that some you can call just, because through him Christianity won, but in reality he was just fighting an enemy, Maxentius, who was a competitor. They both wanted to be emperor, and Constantine used a lot of violence. He killed people. He was anything but a soft guy, or even a fair, righteous guy. In many ways, his life was not that great. So his war can only be considered just because it allowed Christianity to become accepted. So from God's perspective, you can say, but some consider that it was, of course, it was good that Christianity was accepted, but not, it shouldn't have been that way. So that's why I brought him in here. And then, of course, Jesus himself in the Sermon of the Mount, if you take that in isolation, it speaks in favor of total rejection of any kind of violence. There is no just war, there is just peaceful behavior and non-violence. On this um, diagram on the right, you see a certain number of names of various groups, movements, or, or concepts that are related to absolute pacifism. That's taxonomy of pacifism. You can look them up if you're interested. It's worth it, but you have to take the time. Before I finish, I will look at a few special cases a little bit more in depth. One is the Dalai Lama. And interestingly, the Dalai Lama, like Gandhi, is not absolutely against the use of violence in really extreme cases. But he presents very well, he explains very well what the problem is with using violence to essentially defend what is good and to defend peace. And I'll read. Although under particular circumstances, the violent method, any method can be justified. So you can justify it. You can find the arguments to justify it. Nevertheless, once you commit violence, then first counter-violence will be returned. Yeah? You have a gun, you use it, well, the other guy will come with a bigger gun, and then you'll have to take yet a bigger gun, and it will never end. So that's the first thing. Also, if you resort to violent methods, no matter how justified, because the other side has destroyed your monastery. He was speaking about the communist, the Chinese communist government that destroyed monasteries in Tibet. So if you resort to violent methods because the other side has destroyed your monastery, for example, you then have not only lost your monastery, because the enemy has already destroyed it, but you have also lost your special Buddhist practices of detachment, love, and compassion. So, in other words, in order to fight with violence, even if there's a justification to it, in the end you lose, because using violence itself is destructive of what's precious to you inside. So that is a perspective. And I cannot help being reminded of a movie I saw recently. I forgot the name, I forgot the actor. the actor in that movie was actually a man who had been in the military and was the most decorated soldier in World War II, American soldier. And the movie is about all the heroic things he did and always to sacrificing himself to save his fellow soldiers, sacrifice others. Incredible things. I mean, he exposed himself like to hundreds of German soldiers and risking his life. It's very dramatic. And again, this is a movie about his life, but the actor who played in that movie was the man himself, the soldier himself. After the end of the war, he became a hero, and a famous movie maker heard about him and felt, oh, this guy is actually a good actor, and then he asked him to act in his movie. In the movie, he looks so self-confident and so determined, and until the end. And at the end, he has so many medals and he smiles. But then if you look at his life after the war, he suffered of all his life, severe post-traumatic stress disorder. And for instance, he always slept with a gun under his pillow, even when there was no violence around at all. So that told me, yeah, really, you pay the price. Even as a hero, even if you sacrifice yourself, just the fact of being involved in violence, you pay a price because it's contrary to the way human beings should live. So again, it doesn't mean that he was wrong to do it. It means eventually humankind must find a way to solve its differences without war. And I don't know, some of you may know this movie. It's a very famous movie, but 1952. This is Gary Cooper, famous actor. And I think in most cases, that sense wins in most of us. That's the sense of the guy who will fight the just fight. He will not um, hesitate, even if he's completely alone. So that's, he's the sheriff in town. He hears that the horrible gangsters are coming, killers are coming back to town. He's just about to give up his job as sheriff. He got married with his beautiful young wife, and he is ready to leave. He's already on his chariot leaving town to live peacefully somewhere. And then his conscience tells him, I cannot do that. I cannot let the people in my town, I'm responsible for them, exposed to the destructive violence of these criminals and killers. And he turns around. His wife is a Quaker who is absolutely against any violence. And she says, basically, I'll leave you if you do that. And then she takes the train. Last moment, she comes off the train again to help him. So anyway, it's a Hollywood movie. But he fights, and all the people in the village, they are happy to be defended by him, but they're all scared to help him. So that's why you have this picture. He's completely alone. And of course he wins. He kills them, and then he throws away his badge, uh, and he moves along. So that kind of sense resonates with many people, certainly in the United States, but I think most of us. When you gotta fight, you have to fight. You cannot walk away from your responsibility. So I'm not even saying it's good or wrong. I'm just saying I think that in most cases, in most of us, that prevails over the sense that we have to be peaceful, don't move no matter what happens, don't do a thing. And then here's the position of True Father about the Korean War. And of course, there is this for the other course on unification approaches to peace, but since it fits well here, I still wanted to bring it in. God desires to save humankind from evil and sin, not just from war, from evil and sin, and to actualize the ideal he envisioned for all his creation. God wants to create an ideal, that's only good. In the context of God's providential plan, the Korean War was not a simple war merely involving this country and that country. It was just not two countries fighting. It was a just war that shaped history by bringing God's providence to fruition. So it was not just necessary to defend somebody in self-defense. So looking at Augustine, who said you can just do a war when God tells you, not even to defend yourself, there is something there. But it doesn't say just because God tells, and you don't need to, no justification. God tells because God wants to create his ideal. So it's much more than just having peace between people who are peaceful but sinful and will forever fight anyway in the future. That war was one step that was inevitable, therefore just in the process of reaching a peaceful world where war will no longer be necessary. So it's a much deeper perspective on war, I believe, and that's why I wanted to put it here at the end. So now we have considered what makes a war just in the eyes of some and some disagreements that we have. And in the next part of this presentation, I will explain what the responsibility to protect is, which is not only is war acceptable morally, but it's morally not acceptable not to go to war, seems to go much further. See you in a moment.